Look at this graph. It demonstrates what takes place when a currency falls apart. It lost 94% of its value against the US dollar between 2015 and 2025. When it comes to Argentina, things are even worse. The value of the peso fell by 98% against the US dollar. People in Turkey and Argentina lost all of their buying power when they held onto their local currencies. Bitcoin, on the other hand, was like a life jacket. This is how Bitcoin's chart looks when it is paid in lari. Since 2015, it's gone up 650,000%. This is an XRP rose even more, honey. This is how it looks in pesos. It went up by more than 5 million%. Would you believe me if I told you that the US dollar was also in danger today? Since Bitcoin began in 2009, the US dollar measure has dropped more than 8% in just the last 100 days. There have only been 5 times when the US dollar moved in this way, but this drop in the dollar feels different and might be worse than other drops in the past. It's not just another short-term downturn or response to short-term noise in the market. This time, it's happening at the same time as bigger problems like rising debt, tense global situations, and a loss of faith in the US financial system. Bitcoin might play a very different role if the dollar stops being the most important currency. You may already know why this US dollar drop is different unless you've been living under a rock. Trump is back in the news, and he's made it clear that he wants the dollar to lose value. He wants the dollar to fall right. This is something Trump has said more than once. That being said, I'd like to bring up a couple of more current news stories to talk about how this will affect digital assets. This is very important to the future price of XRP. That person who made this great video mostly talks about Bitcoin, but I think XRP plays an even bigger part in the new financial system that will be talked about here. I'd like to bring up the reason why both Vance and Trump have been so harsh in their messages to Chair Powell. Also, in case you guys don't know, Chair Powell is the head of the Federal Reserve. He makes the choices about rate cuts, which is another word for printing money. This is what Vice President J.D. Vance said not long ago. I'd love to hear a reason why Powell can't cut rates 50 basis points now that inflation is low, but can do it before an election. At this point, I really believe that this is the best point that either Trump or Vance has made. A lot of times, Trump has said that Powell is acting in a very political way. It seems like he's making choices based on politics instead of what's best for the U.S. economy. These very strong points that Vance just made are strong signs that that might be the case. Powell can give any reason why he doesn't want to lower interest rates, but the truth is that the US dollar needs to be weaker. It has to happen right away, or else the deficit will keep growing and the US economy will take on record amounts of debt. If this goes on for too long, especially with these interest rates, the system will fall apart completely. Take a look at it this way. You're in the real estate business and you have mortgages on a lot of the buildings you're buying to grow. It used to be that those properties had a cap rate of 6% a year, but the Fed has chosen to raise rates to 6.25%. That is, all of your companies are losing money, right? Depending on how big your business is, you could be losing millions and millions of dollars every single year. If you keep doing that, you'll eventually run out of cash and have to file for bankruptcy and sell all of your properties because you can't afford to pay them off. For 1 or 2 years, this will make you feel like you have no place to go. There are a lot of different types of businesses and industries going through this right now because they are all using debt to make more money. It makes sense to borrow money with a 2% or 3% interest rate if you can then make 5, 6, 7% or even 8% on that money. But obviously, when that gap gets smaller, along with all the risks and ups and downs that come with running a business, like when business is good and when it's bad, it's much easier for you to get into a really tough financial situation where you might have to sell off assets or even shut down your business. And the US government is going through the same thing right now. What will happen if they don't print money and make the US dollar worth less, as we saw with the Argentine peso and the Turkish lira earlier in the video? They will go bankrupt, and then fewer and fewer people will want to do business with the US. That's a quick summary of what's going on right now. Because of this, President Trump keeps saying that Chair Jerome Powell is a very stupid guy and making other negative comments about him. He knows that if something doesn't change quickly, the Republican Party is doomed because someone nominated by the Democratic Party will basically take away all of his power. Clear that Jerome Powell knows he's in a lot of power right now. How could he get to where he is now without realizing that he could put the whole Republican Party at risk? We'll see if he does. But that's basically where we are right now. To back up what I'm talking about, I want to show you the actual deficit we got in May. The US Treasury posted a $316 billion budget deficit, which was the third largest deficit on record. This came at a time when total government spending rose 3% year over year to $687 billion, 0 cents. It's clear that tax income went up by 270% to a record $23 billion, 0 cents. But that wasn't enough to cover the $316 billion, 0 cents deficit. The budget gap is now $1,370 billion, 0 cents, after 8 months of fiscal year 2025. It's the third biggest ever. Also, the government deficit for the past 12 months has grown from 6.1% of GDP to $2 trillion, 0 cents, which is over 6.7% of GDP. It shouldn't be hard to see that the US government is going to be in a lot of trouble if this trend keeps up. The deficit spending problem is getting worse, is that right? There are two choices. You drastically cut what the government spent, right? I don't think any government wants to do that because they want to spend a lot of money on things like the military, defense, and other things like that. Most likely, they don't want to lower that. In fact, they're raising it because of new bills, like the huge, wonderful, beautiful spending bill. The second choice is to print a lot of money. In general, states do this because it lowers the value of the dollar and makes it easier to borrow money. Then you can use all this new money to help lower and pay off debt and make the bubble bigger. Okay, that's pretty much what you do. And if your currency is the world's reserve currency, you should do it because Europe, China, and most of the world's other very developed advanced countries are already doing it. Their rates are going down, down, down. There are even places in Europe where the interest rate is 0%. To be clear, I know you're wondering if it's possible for interest rates to go down. That is something that some countries do in extreme cases as well, which also makes for a very interesting environment. Having said all of that, yes, there is an emergency that needs to be dealt with here. So the question here is, what is the best way for me to deal with this problem right now? This is how I see the whole thing. Your government has done this many times before. Money taken from taxpayers without permission has gone bankrupt, and they keep going bankrupt. What do? To pay for the debt, they must print more money and make your savings worth less, right? I don't see how that banking system can help me in any way. That's what I think. When I look at that banking system, I feel like I'm being ripped off in every way. I'd like to switch to a different banking system where I don't have to worry about a central body. I'm creating money and making my currency worth less. I would also love to work in a business or banking system that makes money printing possible.